better features for users, better things to help them find more optimal lineups or more optimal positions. Those are things that we can really do to help improve the win rate.
Going on, certified homies? Welcome to another episode of From A to B. You have Shiva, and I'm joined by our guest, AJ Does No Wrong Long. You like that nickname?
I do. I like it.
So AJ is the director of product analytics and experimentation at PrizePicks. And if you remember this, it was at EXL where I found you and we were chatting about just like experimentation and like ethics in, let's say, fantasy sports and like online sports stuff. But I think there's some really interesting conversations around like money and fantasy sports that I am really interested in diving deep into. And I think there's the ethical perspective of that I really want to pull into experimentation as a whole. So let's jump into it because this is a really good one. The landscape of, let's say, like money and fantasy sports is really interesting. I don't know if you're allowed to give a perspective on this, but I've like personally not liked how much, let's say, money and fantasy sports is just so infused with like sports watching. Because I love sports. I just want to watch a sport. I don't want to think about fantasy. Are you similarly, or are you like, no, I love it?
I enjoy it because I'm a sports fan and I like to watch, but I also like to feel like I have a little bit of like sweat in the game. And so from that aspect, I like having the money. I understand it's not for everyone. I think the thing that probably frustrates people the most is the amount of advertising, and that you see on the field or on the screen. It's kind of like hard to get away from it. But no, I'm a fan. I feel like it gets me more engaged in the activities that we're doing. So
yeah, there's a higher high, but there's sometimes a lower low.
Absolutely.
When you partake in the fantasy stuff, do you put money on your team doing well, or do you go the opposite where you put money on your team not doing well? So either way, it's a win-win.
Yeah, a life hedge. So I've done both. Yeah. I would actually say I tend to do more of the life hedge now. So if I'm rooting for my team, but I'm worried that they're not going to make it, I will take the other side. And then that way, either way, I'm either feeling great about the team win or I'm feeling okay about a little bit.
A couple extra bucks in your pocket. Yeah, exactly. 100%.
Yeah.
I love it. But I think there's a lot of, let's say responsible ways of using money to like participate in fantasy sports. And I've done it before. I've lost like $20 over the course of my whole career there. And I think that's where I was like, I hated it because I felt more invested in watching certain players score than like enjoying the sport. So I was like, I'm not enjoying the sport. I'm just going to watch the sport. As you can tell, big hockey guy over here. I think there's a point where it could be teetering into unethical, where sometimes, and this is not unique to like, let's say fantasy sports, right? This is true in a lot of other industries. There's certain big name companies I'm not going to name also participate in a lot of dark patterns to capitalize on that. Telecom, et cetera. Like there's just, that happens. It's not unique to this industry. But I do think that this industry is ripe for, let's say, a different level of psychology, because it does involve things that are kind of related to psychological things, and it's money, right? It's not like, it could be a lot of money. So I guess I'm curious, like, where do you define ethics in this? Like, what would you consider ethical when it comes to fantasy sports and companies enabling fantasy sports versus where's stuff you're like, we should avoid that, this isn't good? It's
around enabling our users to be good fans without overextending themselves or without putting themselves in dangerous positions, essentially. And, I think there's a lot of ways that you can over-index on short-term conversion and short-term behavior that's detrimental to the mental health of customers, that's detrimental to financial impacts on customers. And I think that from an ethics perspective, it's good for us to be able, and it's good for the customers, it's good for the business to think more long-term and think more like a fan. So like we want to be fans of our fans for a very long time. And that's kind of how we think about it.
So David brought up David, who participates in the CRO roundtables. He He had a really interesting perspective, and he brought this up, and he was like, because I asked a couple people, I was like, give me some thoughts on like what I should talk to AJ about. So something he mentioned was, it feels like sometimes these companies, I'm not saying PrizePicks, but I'm just saying it feels like there is such potential for companies like this to be in a board meeting and be like, how evil can we be without making everyone mad at us, right? I know that's not how you guys approach it, but man, that feels like I'm sure some companies do operate that way. But how do you build that in to make sure you're not like, how evil can we be? It's truly, as you said, it's focused on fun, and it is focused on making sure they come back and they're enjoying themselves and they're not, falling into psychological issues.
Yeah. I really don't think it's people in a room sitting around saying, how evil can we be? I think it is like,
you must surely think one company does. I'm sure one company somewhere does.
I mean, I maybe, but yeah, I do now have this image in my head of like this group like sitting around like with
exactly. Yes, it's still like the Legion of Doom type shit.
Exactly. But I think that it's misaligned incentives and optimizing for those quarter or annual incentives and trying to hit a mark in the short term. With that, it doesn't take much before, you have a group of people who are making decisions or doing things that are not great for people in the short term. And so it takes strong guardrails and clear messaging and clear like success measures around how you're measuring what's responsible, what's better for your users, what are the things that you care about. Is it long-term retention, better win rates for your users? What are the things that you can do that are more helpful for your users to make sure that they know that you're not the person in the boardroom twirling the thumbs.
You're not the Legion of Doom.
Yes,
correct.
Exactly. Yeah.
So you brought up guardrails, and that's such an interesting conversation because in my perspective, guardrails are some of the most important things, but there can be times where guardrails are too rigid, too strict, and it's like they're so strict the car can't even move through, and that's unfortunate. But if you loosen them too much, sometimes this is a good analogy. Sometimes they wiggle too much and then they just fall over and there's no guardrails anymore. And maybe it's something that you enforce. You start by enforcing the guardrails and they're rigid, and maybe you loosen them. Setting guardrails seems easy. It's just you say the thing and people just have to follow it. But how do you enforce it? Like surely there's some people who are like, hey, AJ, come on, dude. Do we really have can we do something else? How do you maintain the guardrails and also honestly maintain that relationship?
I think it's cultural in the sense that we are all speaking about why these guardrails are important to us and to our customers. Win rate is a good example for us. So how often our users win? We've actually run several experiments recently that have improved the win rate for our users, and we were really excited about that. We want to make sure that we don't decrease that because this industry is difficult enough, right? And so making sure that we make it easier for our customers to win is important to us. If it had gone the other direction, we would not have made the decision that we made. Just knowing that this is an important thing for us as a business and everyone is aligned to that makes the conversation easier. I have had conversations in the past, not here, but in other places where it can be a little bit tougher. For example, if the commercials on the test are great, but there are just, again, over-optimizing for some short-term benefit. But it's whenever someone has a 3-month, not quota, but a target to hit or a 6-month target to hit, it makes it more difficult to have that guardrail conversation around, is this being better for our users?
I know you mentioned culture, and it kind of starts at the top, and everyone is bought into that mentality. I want to go into that in a second, but you mentioned something super interesting. You said the win rate, and that's when us experimentation zero people, win rate's like the experimentation win rate. You're saying the fantasy sports win rate,
yes,
right?
Yeah.
And that's interesting because it's counterintuitive to business goals, where the more the user wins, the less the house wins, right? So in that way, you're saying you want to optimize and make it more like you want to get their win rates up in a way. But also, I think to your point you brought up before, it increases the fun. And the more fun they're having on the platform, making money's fun, Like having money is fun. The hits the dopamine, of course. It's interesting that you're approaching it more from that fun perspective and that customer experience, right? Making sure they're having a good time on it, even sometimes at the cost of the business.
Yeah, absolutely. So we are optimizing for just like a longer term horizon, a longer time horizon. So we want our users to win more for a few reasons. Number one, like we want them to hang out and be our customers for a longer period of time, but also sports is a social thing. And so like the more that you win, the more engaged that you'll be with your friends, the more that you will share that win with other people. And so it has extraneous benefits as well. And so, and we just think like, like I said, we're fans of our fans. We just like to see people win. We recently had we have like a free to play game and somebody won like a 500,000 jackpot and they posted like the video online and then we all watched it and we were so excited. Like we could not be more happy for that person to win a big jackpot like that, and what we have to make some of these things difficult because we can't just give out $1 million a week, so like there are things that, it's a jackpot, like it's a game, but whenever somebody wins, like we are literally excited, throwing a party, like we're pumped about it.
So you talk about like optimizing for longer term metrics and longer term stuff. I know you mentioned that a couple times. Let's go a little bit deeper into that. What are you optimizing for? Is it more tactically like repeat users, bets, plays? Like what are the KPIs you're looking at and why are those KPIs the ones that are indicative of like longer term success or longer term horizon? If you're listening to this episode before the end of February, come to Experimentation Island. Come say hi. I'll have stickers. If you're listening to this after February, kind of shit out of luck. Maybe I'll see you at EXL 2026. By the way, I have promo codes if you want to DM me. Otherwise, do all the free things. Like this episode, subscribe to the podcast, subscribe to my newsletter. It's from A to B.beehive, BEEHIIV.com. Now let's get back to the show.
So repeat, like retention of, but not like entry retention, but retention within like a feature specifically. And then we will look at conversion, but we are not overly focused on the short-term conversion. And then we'll also monitor for like our predictive LTV and compare that predictive LTV between cohorts to be able to see if we believe there's any impact on churn. But it's also the win rate is a big one because it's also one of the things that we've seen to be more predictive of churn. And so if we can improve that win rate, then users churn less.
Is there like a target win rate? Or is it just get it up as much as possible?
I don't think it's get it up as much as possible because I think we could do that. So there probably isn't an optimal win rate. It's how we do it. Within our modeling, there is ways that we can move it one way or another. But that in itself is not like the tool. If we can do it through better features for users, better things to make them play smarter, better things to make them to help them find more optimal lineups or more optimal positions, then those are things that we can really do to help improve the win rate.
I super love that answer because as you were talking, I was like, oh, actually, that's a great answer. Because when people come to like CROs and they're like, hey, can you get our conversion rate up to 20%? And it's like, no, but probably not. But what we're going to do is we're going to follow a process to get it up more. And the focus isn't on what's the number. The focus is we're going to do the process to get the number up. Are we going to hit a target number? We'll try our best. It's going to be hard. But the process, exactly just as you described, is so much more important than like, let's just hit an arbitrary number because reasons.
Yeah. I actually like the metaphor of like a poker game in the sense that
shocker, you're using another
exactly
another analogy.
Yeah.
It's related.
Because people always talk about like outcomes versus process or versus outputs, and so like outcomes is hands one, but you can have a process where you're just riding to the river each hand, and like that's not a very good process because it's extremely risky, right? And so you'll have good outcomes, but you'll also end up going broke at the table, and so you need strong process in order to control the outputs, which will increase the likelihood of good outcomes.
Like counting cards, right?
Exactly. Strong process. Yeah. So strong. Yeah.
Something that, as you're talking, I'll I'm big into sports related stuff. So I'm a huge hockey fan. I'm a semi-huge football fan. I'll passively watch the Knicks. I don't know, it's like hockey and then like football, basketball.
Okay.
But I'm very curious if there's any data or if this is something that PrizePicks is invested in. Is there tangible differences in the way people participate in fantasy sports based on the sport? Like, is hockey betting have a different segment of users where maybe they're betting a lot more, or maybe not? Maybe it's like the golf bettors are the ones that are like super into it, right? I'm curious if there's like any market differences or segment differences based on the sport. And if so, how do you tap into that?
So there are differences just based on the sport and because of what the sport allows us to like surface to customers. So for example, NFL has just a lot more viewers, but they also have a lot more opportunities to update markets across the time as they go, because every time the game is stopped, then you can make more updates to projections. Yeah. For that reason, there's just a lot more interaction on NFL games as opposed to, within hockey, the viewership is just, we do still get a decent amount of people playing.
You don't have to sugarcoat it. Hockey's not a popular sport in the US. It's fine.
It is. So it's still one of the major ones. Like it's still a big one. It's just not one of the top three. But I mean, the hockey fans are like, whenever people watch it and whenever people are playing entries on hockey, they're the real deal. They're the real fans. I don't think there's too many casual hockey fans.
Yes, I am an unhinged hockey fan. Yes, that's correct. I am one of many. So getting back to something that you brought up a bit more is like top-down culture. So when we say like, how do you think about guardrails when it comes to setting in place, let's say, responsible gaming, right? This is another like roundtable conversation that we were talking about where it's almost in parallel, where if you had to think about like the maturity of an organization at a foundational level, or let's say a pyramid, the foundation is like, are you data driven? Do you use data to inform decisions? That's the bottom pillar. And then do you have like a culture of experimentation? And you need a culture of data in order to add experimentation on top of that. But as you're talking about like the responsible gaming part, it feels like both of those are prerequisites in order for this, let's say, pinnacle top point of responsible gaming. Because if you don't have these two pillars, trying to establish responsible gaming is impossible. Is that fair to say?
I would agree with that. If you don't have those two pillars, especially experimentation, in my opinion, then most of what you're speaking about from a standpoint of responsible gaming or impact on users is either vanity metrics or like wildly inaccurate,
Or they're going to the, let's say, unresponsible gaming, the opposite, right? You're optimizing for short-term metrics and pulling out as much money as you can and maybe some dark patterns and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of opportunity for organizations to really over-optimize for the wrong things within these groups. And so making sure that when you're running experiments or whenever you're looking at tests, that you consider what that short-term, not only the first order effects of that short-term behavior, but the second order and the third order effects of that short-term behaviors, and that we're looking at those things to make sure that we're not doing any harm.
There is such a potential that even when you do the most responsible things you can to protect users and foster responsible gaming, ultimately sometimes there will be people who don't follow it or break it or kind of go off the responsible part into unresponsible. I guess, how do you contend with the fact that not everyone will be responsible, and how do you actually protect the users? Because I think your perspective on this is so cool that you actually want to protect the users. It's not like, oh, well, it's sorry, it's America, they could do whatever they want. You're trying to protect them. How do you foster responsible gaming, and those who are not responsible, how do you protect them?
The way that we foster responsible gaming is like through setting up limits. So like enabling users to set limits on their behavior and making them aware that they have those limits, and encouraging them to set limits. Like, we want people to use those limits and those guardrails because it's easier to set those whenever you're in a state of mind that can logically think about what is a good amount of money to spend at this time, as opposed to you've lost some money or you've won some money and you feel like Superman or you're feeling down and you're making emotional decisions as opposed to rational ones. And that also speaks to some of the tools that we use to see if people are chasing losses and try to, and we try to interject and say, it looks like you're chasing, we think you needed timeout. So we have some tools in place to try to prevent people from doing what is kind of like normally known as bad behavior as it relates to responsible gaming, making large deposits after losses or things like that. We also have some tools in place like, so we offer like free mental health support through a partnership with Kindbridge. So if any of and it's available for all of our users. So if anybody is struggling with mental health or feeling, bad about their behavior, they can reach out to Kindbridge. Like that's something that we support. And then we also have recently started to work with another vendor that supports essentially like predicting responsible gaming risk. So like predicting risk of users so that we can interact and interject sooner to help them.
In a super hypothetical situation, Shiva, me, a person who loves money and doesn't care about anyone or anything, I come to you, AJ, I'm like, yeah, why are we adding this nudge? Like, don't we like money? Like, why are we should remove this. Actually, you know what? I'm your boss. We're going to remove this. What happens? How do you and I want to understand that just from like a testament to the culture that is built there. So like what happens when someone kind of goes off the guardrail, so to speak?
We have evidence from other tests, other things, research that expresses how important this is. And so the first thing I would say is if we do that, this is our expected impact, that users will churn faster due to over-indexing for this short-term metric that you're trying to hit. That's just the first impact from like a metric standpoint. Then, okay, so we start to do harm to users, then what happens? Probably regulators and legal comes in. So like just explaining what those longer-term effects would be the way that I would express, my disagreement. So it's not just what are the benefits right now, but okay, we could win here, but we're going to lose this, and then we're going to lose at the next step, and then we're going to lose that next step. And so for that reason, this short-term decision just really isn't worth it.
It is really interesting to hear you keep on harping on short-term versus long-term. And I think that's a testament to just how you've approached this from a business perspective. I wish more companies talk like that, to be honest, because it does feel like with a lot of business stuff lately, it's like, okay, let's think long term. And then it's like, okay, that's lip service. Because when you're actually in the weeds, it's like, what can we do to extract the most money this quarter? Let's do it. Do the things. Get everything we can do. So it's refreshing to hear someone persistently say it's always about long term. We do monitor short term, but it's always about long term.
So we do have like the fact that we're a private company enables that, right? Like we aren't as beholden to like quarterly reports and reports to the street. So like I think that's one piece of it. But there are examples of some private companies who also take that, Buffett and his team are famously long-term and think about the long-term. I would love to say that it started with us being like long-term thinkers, but I actually think it started with us just really liking who our users are and wanting us to make sure that group of users stays with us and we can support them and help them to be like better players.
I kind of hate that it has to be said, but you're like, we have to like our users. So we have to actually say that in 2026, we have to say we like our users. We want them to be successful.
Yeah.
Because I don't think a lot of people say that.
Yeah. I mean, our users are awesome. They're very engaged. They're very social. We engage with them. We want to continue that relationship. I feel like that relationship is important. There are other, competitive things at play, which could also drive a lot of short-term thinking. And then, whenever a market is really competitive or an industry is really competitive and you're not in a position to think about long-term versus just survival, then, that's another thing that actually it can over-optimize just on short-term behavior, which to the detriment of the user or customer.
That's a fair point. When, it's interesting when we talk about experimentation, there are times where like there's like a psychological safety of your job. And if you feel psychologically safe, you might be more prone to try out and take risks. i.e. test some stuff, try some new things and see what happens. Because if you feel safe, if you fail, it's okay. You learn something, you have somewhat of a net. And I think that's where like cultures of experimentation tend to start blossoming and growing when you have that psychological safety, versus if you don't have that culture of, it's not even really culture of experimentation, I guess. It's like culture of failure here. Like failure, safety and failure, I guess, something related to that, where people feel okay to try stuff. But if you don't have that, then you're going to shrink and be like, I'm not going to try much, because if I try something new, I might fail and I might lose my job.
A company where people are afraid to fail will never innovate, because like you're only going to go after the sure things, innovative things, and you're probably going to get swallowed by a startup who had no choice but to try these things. And failure was an option from day one. Whereas if, failure is not an option, then you're never going to innovate. You're never going to try new things. You're always going to be chasing the company who is proven that their idea is valid, right? I think it's a recipe for disaster.
100%. One last thing I wanted to really go into, because I think this is going to help contextualize some of the cool things that you're able to do. So we don't have to go super tactical into like the actual tests that you're running. I'm sure some of that's going to be off limits. Don't need to go that route. But I really want to understand, you mentioned some stuff around the principles of responsible gaming. And you mentioned some stuff around like adding alerts to have users second guess or think about making large deposits after losses, right? That helps promote responsible gaming. Creating choice, control. I know you mentioned some other things like limit setting prompts, session reminders, clearer explanation of game mechanics, so users aren't playing games and then they're like pissed when they thought they'd be winning but they lost because they didn't understand the way that the fantasy sports, like all of it worked, right? I think the other part of it is like, I want to dig a little bit deeper. It's like, how much of this is just like, it's friction, and it's like, just let me do the thing, because it's like, I see it, I'm sure some people see it as like the iPhone, like manage your screen time settings. And it's like, okay, but I could just turn it off and do whatever I want, right? So if I set a barrier, but I'm already in a mentality, in a mode where I'm trying to do whatever I want, healthy or not, it's just it's a speed bump. And if I'm going fast enough, I don't care about it.
So the way that our limits are set up effectively is, so you can have an alert or you can have a limit. An alert lets you know like, hey, you're getting close to this value that you've set. It's not a hard stop. Whereas a limit, we like, once you hit that limit, we no longer allow you to make a deposit or place a lineup. If you turn that limit off, there's still a period where you can still no longer place a deposit or place a lineup. So effectively, we want to make sure that someone who hits the limit says they're like, no, I want to blaze past that. They still have to cool off or take time to make their next step, so that we want to make sure they're not running hot with their emotions. So that's one thing that's, as it relates to this, like the speed bump aspect of it. The other is, we don't want to be overly controlling. We want to enable transparency. We want to empower users. We don't want to be big brother or your parents telling you that you can't do this thing, but we do want to make it clear to you that the behavior that you're engaging could be risky, and like now is a time to take a beat and do some self-reflection and self-assessment.
Do you have any qualitative or quantitative feedback that in general this works for a lot of people? And maybe there's always going to be a small minority of people who are like, dude, just leave me alone. I hate that this is a thing. I'm frustrated, and will angrily contact customer support and complain to them, right? Like, I get that there's probably a small fraction of people who do that, but in general, you have qualitative feedback where it's like, thank you. I appreciated the ability to control this, and it has helped me promote more responsible gaming in the future. And it helps improve the fun aspect.
I can say that users who engage with our responsible gaming tools have a longer life cycle. So like they play for longer, more sustainably. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's a great metric.
The other thing I can say is that, so we've seen like where a user will run hot basically, and then set a limit. And then even if they set that limit and come back later and turn it off, comparing them to someone of the same behavior who doesn't set a limit, it's still a better thing for that person. meaning they will, it's not better for us because the group who doesn't set the limit, they will continue to spend high and basically they'll burn bright and then fall off. Whereas a user who sets that limit will spend less money in the short term, but we know that they stay and have more fun for the longer term. And so those are some things that like we've seen for just the effect of setting those limits. In terms of qualitative feedback, but people actually, from what we've heard from like customer service is whenever users hit the limit and want it off, they're frustrated because they're usually like in an emotional state. We are just effectively doing our best to make sure that that person can't do any harm to themselves or what they're trying to do at that time. I think that we're kind of choosing the lesser of two evils in this sense that we could absolutely just give them the ability to turn it right back on, but then the tool loses its effectiveness. We have a lot of different ways that they can use those tools and set limits and alerts and things like that. And so it's providing guidance on if this one didn't work for you, what's the one that you think will work best next time so that you don't feel this frustrated the next time. But then I think it's also our goal is to help that person take a beat, right? Now is a time to like see, are you still playing within your means, within your level of comfort so that you can decide where you want to go next.
Are the real MVPs the customer service people at PrizePicks?
Always. Absolutely. Yeah.
Like it seems like customer service always just has the MVPs of people because they are the ones who have to deal with the front lines of people who are maybe in a heightened emotional state or dealing with stuff or frustrated because they're on a losing streak. Yeah, it feels like they're always at the front of that and they're always the MVPs.
That team is a team of rock stars. To your point, like it's very rare that people reach out to customer service to say, "Hey, y'all are doing a great job."
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. But I do think I think our customer service team are rock stars. I think that they handle these challenges very well. I'm really grateful for the work that they do.
I'm curious what the balance is of like human versus AI for stuff like that. And I've seen more companies try to replace basic customer service tasks with AI and bots. And I don't know, part of me is like, some of these people might be in super emotion states and they just might abuse a customer service person, just yell and scream at them. So I would rather prefer they yell at a bot because humans don't deserve that. Customer service people don't deserve that. But the other side of it is like a customer service person trained to help de-escalate and work with them and say like, okay, you're in a heightened emotional state. Let's work with you on, the psychologist or therapist or whatever else. Like that might be a better transition. So I'm curious if you have a POV on like the use of AI with something like that, because I've seen more people want to use AI there. And maybe that's not a terrible use case to protect humans. All right. Well, this has been an amazing conversation, AJ. I wanted to end on this one last question, or maybe just like this is like a wrap up. If you were to be talking to me, as you are, and I'm coming to you and saying, I'm a little concerned that my optimization program or my product is deviating a bit into what I would consider unethical, what advice would you give me?
What are you incentivizing with your current success measures? Like, what are the things, not only in your business, but for your users, like, are you incentivizing them to play for a long time? Are you incentivizing them to be in every day? Because, if you want them to be in every day, that's probably going to be good for the short term, but not great for the long term, because people get tired of that everyday engagement. It's bad for mental health. So like, what does a great user look like, and how are you incentivizing and optimizing for that?
Yeah, I think that's great advice. Just like at the end of the day, think about what you're actually trying to fix and work with the customers on. And like you said, quite a few times, and we'll reiterate one last time, always think about those long-term metrics. The short-term ones will get you into a dangerous slippery slope, potentially, of perverse incentives and other potential negative business reasons. So always think long-term.
I also think that like choosing the right success measures and tests is probably one of like the hardest parts, in my opinion, for this reason, because there's, it's kind of easy to pick a short-term success measure. It's hard to understand what those additional externalities are going to be. And so having holdout groups and having follow-on studies to understand engagement and the effects of that additional engagement. Adoption of those features is important.
All right, AJ does no wrong long. Thank you for joining. Anything you want to plug? Anything you want to chat about? Any fun projects you got working on?
Nothing to plug. I'm just excited about like where we are in our program and what we're doing with our users. Yeah, I'm excited about being, a fan for who our players are.
Amazing. Looking forward to more thought leadership from you. But thank you so much for joining.
Thanks a lot.